You think justice means law, evidence, and mercy? In 1600s Bavaria, it meant red-hot pincers tearing into a mother's flesh, while her sons were forced to watch. Her name was Anna Papenheimer. Poor, unwanted, and accused of witchcraft, she was tortured for days, then executed in front of 10,000 people. Her crime? Being poor? Her punishment? A political performance of suffering. They didn't just kill her, they made her death a message. By the end of this story, you'll realize that the true crime wasn't hers. It was society's need for a scapegoat. Ready for the most horrifying witch trial you've never heard of? Let's begin. You thought execution meant a swift swing of the axe? Not this time. The man standing before Anna Papenheimer held no blade. In his hands, a pair of red-hot iron pincers glowing with heat. The crowd, over 10,000 strong, fell into a breathless silence. They weren't here for justice. They were here for a spectacle. Anna knelt on the scaffold, bones fractured from days of torture. She had already confessed, after being torn apart by racks, flogged with spiked whips, and humiliated in court. Not that her confession mattered. It was scripted long before she ever opened her mouth. Her sons, grown men now, stood chained nearby, forced to watch. The executioner moved to her chest. He clamped the glowing pincers down. The scream that followed didn't even sound human. Some witnesses said she didn't scream at all, just a gurgling moan, the sound of a soul cracking in half. Her body convulsed. Her sons screamed, and still the torturer wasn't done. This wasn't punishment. This was political theater, a warning scorched into living flesh. But how does a woman end up here? Naked, bleeding, mutilated before her own children. To understand that, we have to go back. Not to a crime scene, but to a childhood of filth, whispers, and guilt by birth. And the moment society decided Anna Papenheimer wasn't a person, but a monster. Anna Papenheimer never had a chance. She was born into rot. Her father was a gravedigger in a Bavarian village, a man who handled corpses, buried the plague dead, and walked among tombstones, while others crossed the street to avoid him. In 16th century Germany, touching death made you unclean, spiritually contaminated, cursed. Imagine being 6 years old and watching other children run away from you, not because you're mean, but because they believe you carry the plague. Shopkeepers wouldn't touch her hand. Some wouldn't even speak to her. Bread was dropped onto the counter, never passed directly. She didn't just live on the margins. She was the margin. By the time Anna met her future husband, Paulus, she had already been marked. He was a sewer cleaner, another man whose job kept society running while branding him inhuman. The town needed men like him, but they also despised them. Their marriage wasn't just love, it was survival. Two souls permanently stained by society's fears, clinging together in the shadows. And when they had children, 3 boys, they passed on more than just their name. They passed on that stain, that invisible curse. Each child was born into the same filth, the same whispers, the same threat. They didn't know it yet, but they weren't building a family. They were building the perfect scapegoats, and Bavaria was about to go hunting. By 1590, being poor in Bavaria wasn't just hard, it was illegal. Laws were passed criminalizing vagrancy. Families without permanent homes, like the Papenheimers, were now considered dangerous. Begging became a punishable offense. Moving from town to town looking for work, grounds for arrest, every creak of a wagon wheel, every knock at the door. Every hoofbeat on cobblestone could mean soldiers. Paulus, Anna's husband, was desperate. Their children were starving, so he took the only work left, The worst work. He became a night soil man. He cleaned latrines, sewers, human waste. The job came with one reward, a new name. Papenheimer. Not a family name, a label. It meant filth handler, waste hauler, or worse. A brand that stuck to their skin like the stench of what Paulus hauled through the streets each night. The irony? His work was essential. He kept the town clean. But society spat on him anyway. Imagine your child asking why the other children throw stones at him on the way to church. Why grown men laugh and whisper when you pass by. Why even the priest holds his breath when handing you communion. The Papenheimers were legal now, but more visible. And being visible made them vulnerable. Because the moment someone needed a scapegoat, their faces were already burned into public disgust. And someone would need one soon. It started, as many horrors do, with a thief. In 1600, inside a freezing Munich prison, a petty criminal faced execution. The noose was ready, but his captors offered him a deal. Give us someone worse, and maybe you'll live. So he started talking. First, robbery accomplices, petty crimes, names no one cared about. But then came the question every inquisitor loved to ask. Do you know any witches? That's when he dropped the bomb. The Papenheimers, he said. Those filth haulers? They weren't just dirty. They were devil worshippers, baby killers, ritual murderers. He claimed they hunted pregnant women, murdered them, and used their unborn children to make invisible candles, forged from unbaptized baby fat. Light one, he said, and you could vanish from sight. It was insane, a grotesque fairy tale of blood and sorcery. But here's the real horror. The bigger the lie, the more people believed it. Authorities didn't ask for evidence. They didn't question the thief's motives. They heard the words they were waiting to hear. Witchcraft, Satan, infants, perfect. The Papenheimers were already despised. Now, they were monsters. The kind of monsters a duke could burn, publicly. To unite a frightened population, to cleanse his streets, to win power. The fuse had been lit, and Anna had no idea the fire was racing straight for her door. Duke Maximilian the Faun of Bavaria wasn't just a ruler. He was a man on a mission. The Catholic Counter-Reformation was in full swing. Protestants were enemies. Witches were everywhere. Fear gripped the countryside like frostbite. Maximilian wanted to be seen not just as a leader, but as a divine sword of justice. He needed a grand gesture, something loud, something horrifying, something unforgettable. And then came the report. A family of nobodies, a gravedigger's daughter, a sewer cleaner, accused of murdering children, worshipping Satan, making magical candles from human fat. It was perfect. No powerful relatives, no legal defense, no social standing to complicate things. The Papenheimers were ideal. Human garbage already cast aside by society. Now all he had to do was burn them in front of everyone. Maximilian didn't want a trial. He wanted a show. He personally summoned elite interrogators, ordered public proclamations of the family's guilt, designed the execution as a moral cleansing ceremony. Invitations were sent out. Officials from across Bavaria were told to attend. This wouldn't just be a punishment. It would be a sermon, written in pain, performed on a scaffold, witnessed by thousands. And Anna? She would be the center of it all, not as a mother, not as a wife, but as a cautionary tale, wrapped in flames. The Papenheimers were asleep in a squalid tavern when the soldiers came. It was still dark. Snow mixed with ash in the air. Boots thundered down cobblestone streets. Metal clanged. Doors shattered. Torches lit the faces of terrified children. Paulus, Anna's husband, barely had time to rise before a sword slammed into his ribs. Anna screamed, not out of fear for herself, but for her sons. Simon, the eldest, froze. Gumpre tried to run and was tackled. Little Michel clung to his mother's skirts until a guard ripped him away by the hair. They were bound in chains, dragged outside, and no one stopped it. Neighbors peeked from windows and quickly closed the shutters. Who would defend the Papenheimers? They were human waste, after all. Disposable. Anna fought. Of course she did. She kicked, clawed, cursed like a wild animal. But the records describe it differently. They called her possessed, unnatural, witch-like. Because even a mother's instinct could be twisted into evidence of guilt. The guards didn't just arrest them. They paraded them through towns where they had once begged, past people who had once turned away, now cheering their fall. They were no longer a family. They were prisoners of spectacle, props in a pageant of fear. And Anna, she was about to enter a dungeon designed not just to extract confessions, but to destroy the soul. The prison wasn't just stone. It was a machine, built to grind the human spirit into ash. Anna Papenheimer was thrown into a freezing cell, her arms shackled above her head. No bedding, no light, no rest, just the distant echo of screams. Other prisoners, other victims, other witches. But Anna wouldn't confess. Not at first. She knew what they were trying to do. Knew it was all a lie. Knew her children's lives depended on her strength. So the torturers escalated. They placed her on the strappado, a rope tied behind her back, then yanked high into the air and dropped without warning. Her shoulders dislocated instantly. When that didn't work, they brought out the Spanish boot. Iron clamps crushed tight against her legs, slowly cracking the bones with each turn. But the worst pain wasn't physical. It was the moment they marched her sons into the room. They didn't beat her. They made her watch as they whipped her boys, one by one, until they bled and screamed and begged her to confess to whatever they wanted. That broke her. She admitted to killing babies, worshipping Satan, making invisible candles, everything they demanded. It wasn't a confession. It was a mercy plea, not for herself, but for her children. But the torturers weren't done. Now they had the truth. All that remained was punishment. On the morning of execution, 10,000 people gathered outside Munich. Vendors sold food. Children sat on shoulders. Priests handed out pamphlets explaining how this public punishment would cleanse the land of evil. It felt more like a festival than a death sentence. Anna was dragged onto the scaffold. She couldn't walk. Her legs had been shattered by torture. Her arms hung useless from dislocated shoulders. Her body was bruised, blistered, broken. But her eyes? Still alive. Still burning. Then she saw them. Her sons, Simon, Gumpre, and little Michel, chained to wooden posts at the edge of the crowd. Forced to watch, forced to listen, forced to learn what happens to those marked as monsters. The executioner stepped forward, but he didn't bring a sword or an axe. He brought iron pincers, glowing red with heat. He walked to Anna, and without a word, clamped down on her chest. The crowd gasped. Her sons screamed. The flesh sizzled, her body convulsed. But she did not scream, not in a way anyone expected. Witnesses say the sound she made was not human, but hauntingly quiet, like a sob wrapped in smoke. And this wasn't the end. It was just the first act. Because her death wasn't the only message. The real horror was still to come. After the pincers tore Anna's chest apart, the executioner paused, not out of mercy, but for dramatic effect. He turned to the crowd, held the bloody instrument high like a trophy, then slowly, methodically, began tearing pieces of her flesh from her limbs. One for each crime, one for each fabricated sin. The announcer listed them out like theater credits. Murderer of children, rip. Worshipper of Satan, tear. Maker of magic candles, burn. Each accusation followed by another mutilation. This wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a ritual. A public script, written by the Duke, performed by state agents, meant to terrify every man, woman, and child watching. It said, "This is what happens when you cross the line, when you are different, when you are unwanted." And all the while, her sons were forced to watch. 10-year-old Michel vomited. Simon wept openly. Gumpre screamed for them to stop. They didn't. Instead, the torturers shouted at them, "Look at her! This is your mother! This is what witches look like!" It wasn't just cruelty. It was psychological warfare. But Anna somehow remained conscious, broken, dying, but still present, because they hadn't yet delivered the Duke's final message. That would come in fire. The executioners tied Anna to the stake using iron bands. Her body barely moved, what remained of it. Her skin blistered and torn, muscles shredded, her chest a ruin of scorched flesh. She had already confessed, already suffered. But still, they brought the torch. Why? Because they weren't killing Anna. They were killing a symbol. The fire was lit beneath her feet, slowly, deliberately, not to give her mercy, but to make the flames climb. Smoke poured into the sky. The crowd roared, then fell silent again, transfixed. Some knelt to pray, others cheered, a few fainted from the smell. And her sons? Still forced to watch, Michel, the youngest, screamed for his mother until his voice broke. Gumpre passed out. Simon, 15 years old, stood silent, trembling, his eyes wide open. He never blinked. The Duke's officials took notes. How did the crowd react? Did the message land? Was it horrifying enough? And as Anna burned alive, bound and dismembered, someone in the audience whispered, "She doesn't look like a witch." But it was too late. The story had been written in blood and smoke. And soon, her sons would burn too. Because in this performance, no one was allowed to survive the ending. If you thought they'd spare the children, think again. The Duke's justice didn't stop at Anna. Her sons were guilty too, not of any crime, but of inheritance. Guilt by blood, guilt by association. The logic was simple and horrifying. If Anna was a witch, her sons were tainted. If they lived, the evil could spread. So just days after Anna's execution, the boys were put on trial. But there was no trial. Simon, Gumpre, and little Michel were led from their cells, still bruised, still bleeding, still grieving, and told to confess. Not to crimes, to bloodlines, to sin in the womb. They were accused of witnessing witchcraft, of benefiting from demonic rituals, of knowing their mother's evil. They denied it, but no one cared. Simon was the first. He was 16, strong, angry, but he broke under torture just like his mother. His confession was signed in pain. Then Gumpre, then Michel, only 10 years old. The guard said he didn't understand what was happening, but he understood enough to beg for his mother. They were all sentenced to death, not as boys, not as people, as symbols. Their execution would be public, brutal, and like their mothers, it would leave a scar on history. Because the Papenheimers weren't being erased. They were being turned into a legend, a warning etched into the psyche of a terrified population. They marched Simon, Gumpre, and Michel to the same square where their mother died. Same platform, same instruments, same crowd. Only this time, the spectacle was worse. Because everyone knew these were children. Simon, the oldest, tried to walk tall. He didn't flinch as they bound his wrists. He stared out at the sea of faces, searching for one that might look ashamed. He found none. Gumpre stumbled. His legs were too weak. The guards dragged him. Michel cried, called for his mother, asked if she'd be there soon. A soldier told him, "She's waiting in hell." That was the kind of cruelty they considered justice. Their execution began with strappado, the same torture used to dislocate their mother's arms. The crowd watched silently. Some turned away. Others brought their children closer. "Let them see," one father whispered, "so they never forget." And then, the flames. One by one, the Papenheimer sons were tied to stakes beside their mother's ashes. No trial, no mercy, no innocence. Simon screamed his mother's name. Gumpre wept and begged to be killed faster. Michel burned alive without understanding why. This was the Duke's message, burned into an entire generation's memory. Fear us, obey us, or you and your children will meet the same fate. And it worked. No one dared speak the Papenheimer name for decades. After the smoke cleared, the scaffold was torn down. The ashes of Anna and her sons were swept away like garbage, and the people of Munich went back to life. No memorials, no records of grief, just silence. The town pretended it hadn't just witnessed the state-sanctioned murder of a family. Shopkeepers reopened, priests gave sermons, children played in the streets where boys had been burned alive just days earlier. If you asked what happened, they said, "Oh, they were witches." Then they changed the subject. Because remembering was dangerous. To remember Anna Papenheimer meant admitting what they had seen, that they cheered while a woman had her chest torn apart, that they watched a 10-year-old boy cry for his mother while soldiers held him over a fire. It was easier to believe the lie, the invisible candles, the devil worship. It made their own complicity feel holy. And for the Duke, it was a political triumph. His message had landed. The people were afraid again, afraid of witches, of disobedience, of standing out. But here's the twist. The records survived, tucked away in court ledgers, scribbled in the margins of execution logs, preserved in whispers, then rediscovered centuries later by historians who couldn't believe what they read. The truth refused to die. Even if Anna did. For centuries, the Papenheimer case was held up as proof of demonic evil. Textbooks printed the story of their witchcraft without question. Preachers warned of invisible candles. Parents used Anna's name to scare children into obedience. Be good, or the Papenheimer witch will come for you. It was a legend, but the wrong kind. A lie repeated so often, it became fact. But in the 20th century, something shifted. Historians digging through archives found the trial records, real, dusty, handwritten accounts from 1600, and they didn't tell a tale of sorcery. They told a story of poverty, prejudice, and political theater. There were no bodies of murdered pregnant women, no satanic circles, no magical candles. Just a family despised for being poor, accused because a thief needed a lie, burned because a duke needed an example. The myth cracked, and through that crack, the truth poured out. Anna Papenheimer was no witch. She was a mother, a wife, a victim of fear, superstition, and ambition. Her story didn't survive because people remembered it. It survived because it was too cruel to forget. And today, centuries later, we can finally say her name not with condemnation, but with sorrow, with rage, with truth. Anna Papenheimer died over 400 years ago. But her story? It's not ancient. It's timeless. Because what happened to her didn't require magic. It required only poverty, isolation, and a society hungry for someone to blame. She was tortured not for what she did, but for what she was. A poor woman, an outsider, a mother with no power to protect her children. The instruments of her death, pincers, fire, rumor, may be gone, but the structure, still here. Think about modern witch hunts. Not the literal kind, but the ones we stage on social media. The families destroyed by gossip. The scapegoats chosen to calm a fearful public. The public rituals of humiliation disguised as justice. We don't burn people alive anymore, but we still destroy them in the name of security. Still punish the powerless for the sins of the powerful. Anna's name was almost erased, her voice stolen, her children silenced. But now, you know the truth. And the next time someone tells you a monster must be punished, ask one question. Or is it just another Papenheimer? We began with red-hot pincers and a mother on her knees, watched by her sons, watched by 10,000 silent witnesses, torn apart not because she was guilty, but because she was convenient. Now that you've heard the full story, what haunts you most? Was it the executioner tearing into her chest as her children screamed? Was it the duke who turned torture into political theater? Was it the crowd, the parents, who brought their children to watch? Or maybe it's what happened after. The silence, the forgetting, the way a lie was allowed to survive while a family burned into ash. Because here's the truth. Anna Papenheimer was never a witch. She was a product of poverty, of fear, of a society that needed monsters. They didn't just kill her. They branded her. They rewrote her. And the most chilling part? It worked. For centuries, her story wasn't one of injustice. It was one of warning. She was remembered as the evil mother, the baby killer, the unclean, all because one thief told a lie, all because one duke needed power. But history, no matter how twisted, leaves fingerprints. Through trial records, execution logs, and scattered letters, modern historians pieced her life back together. Not the witch, but the woman. Not the monster, but the mother. A woman who begged for her children's lives, who endured days of pain, who stayed silent until they made her watch her sons suffer. And even then, she confessed not out of guilt, but out of love. Today, we think we're past this, more rational, more just. But ask yourself this: who are the Papenheimers now? Who are the people society still casts out? Who are we blaming for our fear? Who's being called dangerous because they're poor, different, or powerless? It's easy to look at 1600s Bavaria and feel disgusted. Harder to admit we still run modern witch trials, just with new tools. We shame, we exile, we cancel. And we watch, sometimes gleefully. We still mistake humiliation for justice, still punish the inconvenient, still let fear make decisions for us. But Anna's story is here now, unburied, undeniable. Let it be a warning, but not the one they meant it to be. Let it remind us how far power will go to control a story, how easy it is to turn a mother into a monster, how fast justice becomes theater when the crowd demands a show.